My name is Eleanor Hart, and I am 62 years old. For most of my adult life, I believed I had mastered the quiet art of peace. I built routines. I cultivated patience. I learned that harmony is something you choose, not something that's given. Even after my husband, Daniel, retired early and his mother, Margaret, began spending more time in our home, I told myself that love required flexibility. Or at least tolerance. Our house sits on the edge of a small town where the mornings smell like pine and cool soil. Every day, I'd rise before the sun, make myself a mug of tea, and sit by the window to watch the blue light crest over the hills. It was my one guaranteed pocket of serenity before any demands, interruptions, or unexpected knocks echoed through the day. But for the past year, ever since Margaret began staying with us temporarily, my morning silence was rarely silent anymore. She had a habit of waking before dawn and rummaging through the kitchen as if foraging. Cupboards banged, drawers squeaked, and she often muttered under her breath about how things were never where they ought to be. Still, I tried to keep perspective. She was nearly 80, set in her ways, and struggling with loneliness after her husband passed. I told myself I could be patient. Yet small irritations began collecting like dust in the corners of our home. She'd complain about the detergent I bought, the way I arranged the pantry, even the fabric softener I used on her bedding. One evening, she said the casserole I made was too ambitious, as though seasoning was an affront to her personal history. But the real friction began when she started hinting at money. She'd say things like, "In my day, wives contributed more," or, "I don't know how women justify staying home so much." The irony was that I had worked for 35 years as a hospice nurse. I retired only after a knee injury made 12-hour shifts unsustainable. Meanwhile, her son, my husband, had quietly asked her not to stress me with unfair comparisons. But Margaret was a woman who regarded opinions as both gifts and weapons, and she handed them out freely. I sensed something was building. The way thick clouds gather before a storm. The way tension hums beneath the calm. And though I didn't yet know what would snap, I felt in my bones that a confrontation was forming out there in the near future, waiting for the right moment to leap into the open. What I didn't know was that Margaret's notion of contribution would soon become the match thrown onto dry grass. And I, who had lived my entire life avoiding conflict, would be forced to choose between letting someone trample me or standing up with a quiet and calculated strength I had spent decades honing without ever realizing it. That morning, when she shuffled into the kitchen with purpose in her steps and judgment in her eyes, I had no idea the storm was finally here, nor that it would lead me to gather receipts, documents, and facts like armor, nor that the truth, once revealed, would change the fabric of our home forever. All I knew then was this: peace was about to become negotiation, and negotiation, when pushed too far, could become justice. The moment it happened was strangely mundane. It was a Wednesday morning, halfway through my first cup of tea. I had just settled into my chair when Margaret walked in holding a stapled packet of papers as though she'd printed a government decree. She stood over me. "Eleanor, we need to discuss your contribution." I looked up calmly. "My contribution to what exactly?" "To this household," she said, tapping the stack. "I've done the math." I nearly laughed, not because it was funny, but because the seriousness in her tone was so mismatched with reality. But when she laid the papers on the table, my amusement evaporated. The packet listed estimated monthly costs for food, utilities, toiletries, cleaning supplies, phone service, household maintenance, even wear and tear on the furniture. At the bottom was a total, an amount she believed represented what I owed for living in my own home. My name was printed at the top like an invoice. My hands turned cold. "You made this for me?" She folded her arms. "Daniel pays for everything. You should contribute your fair share. That's how a proper wife behaves." My voice stayed level. "You're aware that I paid off half this house, yes? That every piece of furniture in this room was bought during the 22 years I worked full-time." "You worked," she said, dismissive, "but now you don't. And expenses don't stop just because you've decided to rest." Decided to rest. The word stung, sharper than I expected. She slid the invoice toward me. "I've itemized what you use personally. These numbers are generous. I didn't include things like the patio heater, even though you're the one who insists on sitting outside at night." I studied her face, her satisfaction, her certainty, and something inside me shifted, like the slow but undeniable turning of gears. She continued, "It's only fair. I contribute to this household by offering my presence and my help." I blinked. Your presence is your contribution? Of course. I'm elderly. I keep you company. I provide wisdom. I inhaled slowly. And what about your own expenses? The clothes I wash for you? The groceries I cook specifically for your dietary needs? The medications I pick up for you because you refuse to use automatic refills? I didn't ask for any of that, she snapped. You decided to do it. Her tone was the final click of a latch opening deep within me. I had always believed in kindness, in compassion, in handling conflict with grace. But grace does not require surrender. Grace can stand upright. Grace can hold receipts. And I remembered something then, something my mother told me when I was young. She said, "People will try to rewrite the truth when they think you're too tired to correct them." Margaret believed I was tired. I wasn't. Not anymore. I said, "So you want documentation?" "I want fairness." A stillness settled around us, thin but powerful, like a drawn bowstring. "Very well," I said. "If documentation is what you want, documentation is what you will receive." Her smile told me she thought she'd won something. But the moment she left the room, I opened my laptop, pulled out folders of receipts, and began a quiet, methodical process that would take days. This wasn't retaliation. It was truth. And soon she would see it in black and white. Before I could proceed, I needed to understand why her actions stung so deeply. Because confrontations are never just about the moment. They're about the history behind it. I grew up in a household where my mother raised 4 children alone after my father left. She worked nights and slept in short, exhausted bursts. As the eldest, I learned early to take on responsibilities others didn't see. I cleaned. I cooked. I kept the family together. My mother used to say I had an old soul, one that carried more weight than it showed. Perhaps that's why hospice nursing felt natural to me. Caring for people in their most vulnerable moments required patience, structure, and quiet strength. People often mistake that strength for softness. But anyone who has held a dying person's hand knows the difference. When I met Daniel at 35, I thought I'd found someone who appreciated both my gentleness and my resilience. He did. He still does. But his mother, she had always struggled with the idea that he married someone she didn't choose. Margaret believed every woman owed her something: respect, obedience, deference. And though she had never been outwardly cruel before she moved in, she carried a consistent undertone of disapproval. A little jab here, a condescending remark there. I brushed them off for years, telling myself she came from another time. But the truth was simpler. She resented the space I held in her son's life. And now, with her living under our roof, that resentment had grown roots. As I sifted through old receipts, statements, and warranty documents, I realized I wasn't just responding to a single insult. I was reclaiming years of quiet dismissal. I was bringing clarity to a story she had been rewriting in her head for a long time. Because Margaret lived with a particular belief, that I existed in a role beneath her. That my choices were indulgences. That my work, past and present, was invisible. She didn't see the years of double shifts I worked to help pay off our mortgage. She didn't see the night I sprained my wrist assisting a patient. She didn't see the exhaustion, the dedication, the care. In her mind, my retirement had erased my history. As these thoughts unfolded, another realization settled in. Margaret wasn't motivated by fairness. She was motivated by control, by fear of irrelevance, by the quiet panic that she no longer dictated the rhythms of her son's life. This confrontation had nothing to do with money. It was about rewriting a hierarchy that no longer existed. And I intended to make that exceedingly clear. That week, as I pulled together every shred of evidence showing exactly how this household operated, and exactly how much she used, relied upon, or benefited from without acknowledgement, I understood that this wasn't vengeance. It was restoration. Truth, when laid out plainly, becomes a mirror. And Margaret had spent years avoiding her reflection. Soon she would see it, and she would have no choice but to recognize the woman she had so underestimated. I approached the task like a seasoned nurse handling a complex case. Methodical. Precise. No emotion, just clarity. First, I cataloged every household expense for the past 2 years, the period during which she had lived with us off and on. Groceries, utilities, prescriptions, gasoline, delivery fees, toiletries, specialty foods for her sodium-restricted diet, and the additional heating costs because she insisted on keeping her room at 78 degrees. Then I separated items into categories, shared, mine, hers. I made tables. Charts. I scanned receipts, labeled them, and and created a digital folder with subfolders for every category. But I didn't stop there, because Margaret's invoice to me hadn't merely listed financial contributions. It had framed me as a dependent, someone who consumed without giving back. So I documented every function I performed in this household. Every grocery run. Every appointment rearranged to accommodate her needs. Every meal prepared. Every load of laundry done specifically for her items. Every ride to the doctor or physical therapist. Every time I stayed home because she wasn't comfortable being alone. I listed the yard work I did. The repairs I handled when she refused to call a professional because she didn't trust strangers. The administrative tasks I quietly completed, including managing her medical portal, refilling her medications, and tracking her insurance paperwork. None of this was done to shame her. It was done to present an accurate picture of reality. And the more accurate the picture became, the angrier I felt. Not because of the work itself, but because of how thoroughly she had erased it. One afternoon, as I was sorting through statements, Daniel walked into the living room and froze when he saw the mountain of documents spread across the table. "Ellie, what is all this?" I explained, calmly, without dramatics. His face darkened. "She made an invoice? For you. She believes I'm not contributing," I said. "I'm gathering evidence to show the actual balance of things." He sat beside me, shaking his head. "You shouldn't have to do this." "I know," I replied softly. "But if I don't, she will continue rewriting the story. And you know as well as I do, once she rewrites something, it becomes her reality." He rubbed his face. "Do you want me to talk to her?" "No. This is between her and the truth. And the truth needs to come from me." He hesitated, then nodded. "I trust you." His support meant everything, but I also understood the subtle weight of it. Because children, even adult children, struggle to confront a parent's flaws. Asking Daniel to manage this conflict would place him in an impossible position. This confrontation needed a steady, impartial narrator. Me. Over the next 3 days, I compiled everything into a clean, concise document. Not emotional. Not accusatory. Simply factual. A mirror held up without distortion. By the time I finished, my folder contained a detailed breakdown of every expense related to her presence in the home. A list of my contributions, both financial and labor-based. Receipts for everything she personally used, from shampoo to heating pads. Comparisons between what she claimed I owed and what she actually cost. A final summary showing the household's balance of contribution. When I printed the packet, it was nearly twice the thickness of the invoice she'd made for me. And I knew exactly how I would deliver it. Not with anger. With precision. Because calm truth carries the most undeniable weight. On Saturday morning, Margaret sat at the kitchen counter reading the newspaper, glasses perched low on her nose. She looked up when I entered but didn't offer a greeting. I placed the packet on the table beside her. "What's this?" she asked, eyebrows tightening. "You asked for documentation of my contributions," I said. "This is everything." She squinted, flipping open the first page. I watched her eyes move quickly, expecting to dismiss whatever I'd assembled. But then her expression changed, just slightly, as she realized the document was categorized, itemized, and extensively sourced. "What is all of this?" she demanded. "Receipts," I said. "Records. Your invoice inspired me to review the household finances thoroughly." She turned a page, then another, and another. Her mouth tightened when she reached the section titled, "Expenses Attributable to Margaret Hart, 24-month period." "This can't be right," she murmured. "It is," I said. I double-checked every figure. She flipped to the subsection where I had listed items she directly used. Her medications, her specialty foods, the orthopedic cushions she insisted on ordering and then sent back twice, the bath oils, the heating pads, the slippers, the humidifier parts, the additional electric usage for her room. "You're exaggerating. Everything is documented with receipts," I replied. She shifted uncomfortably, her cheeks reddening. She turned to the next section, household labor contributions. She skimmed the list, meals prepared, laundry cycles, rides, appointments, errands. She paused when she reached the note. Laundry load count, Margaret's items. 132 in the past year. Laundry load count, Eleanor's items. 38 in the past year. She moved on to the final section, net contribution comparison. I saw her swallow hard. The summary was clear. By financial contribution, I had paid for 42% of the household's expenses during her 2-year presence. By labor contribution, I contributed approximately 82% of household tasks. Her net support was minimal, and in many cases negative, because her needs increased the total costs of the household. When she finally closed the packet, she didn't speak for nearly a minute. Then she said quietly, "Why did you do all this?" "Because you told me I wasn't contributing," I replied. "And I wanted the reality to be clear." She frowned, her voice brittle. "I didn't think you'd take it this far." "I didn't take it far," I said calmly. "I took it accurately." She looked away, her fingers trembling slightly. "I just wanted to feel needed," she whispered. "I wanted to feel like I still mattered in this house." That admission startled me. I sat down across from her. "Margaret, you do matter. But demanding that others diminish themselves to make you feel valued isn't fair." She didn't respond, didn't argue, didn't lash out. The truth had struck deeper than I expected. For the first time since she moved in, she was quiet. And I realized the confrontation I expected might not come in the form of an explosion. It might come in the form of silence. The next morning, Margaret requested a family meeting, a phrase that carried a faint echo of childhood dread. She waited until Daniel finished his coffee and sat at the dining table before she began. Her hands were folded, knuckles pale. My packet sat beside her like an uninvited witness. "I reviewed everything Eleanor gave me," she said. Daniel looked at me, then at her. "And," she drew a shaky breath. "I didn't realize how much she was doing, or how much she was paying for. I thought things just happened around here." I remained silent, allowing the truth to fill the space. "But I need to explain something," she added, lifting her chin slightly. "I made that invoice because I felt like I didn't have a place in this house anymore. I felt like I was taking up space no one wanted me to take." Daniel softened. "Mom, you're always welcome here." She shook her head. "No, I see now that I have been difficult." This was the moment, the turning point, and I knew I needed to speak, not with accusation, but with clarity. "Margaret," I said, my voice steady, "you are not a burden because you need help. Everyone needs help at some point. You became a burden only when you refused to acknowledge the help you received." She winced, but she didn't interrupt. "You asked me to contribute," I continued. "But I have been contributing, financially, physically, emotionally, for years. You just didn't want to see it. And when people feel invisible long enough, they stop allowing others to define them." Her eyes glistened, but she blinked the tears back. Daniel touched her hand. "Mom, Eleanor has supported us both more than you realize." She nodded stiffly. "I see that now." Then she turned to me fully. "What do you want from me?" "Ah, the essential question." "I want honesty," I said. "Respect. Recognition that I have earned my place in this household just as much as anyone else." "And what happens now?" she asked. "That's up to you," I replied. "You can stay here, but under one condition: we operate with truth. Not assumptions. Not invented narratives." She exhaled slowly. "I can agree to that." For the first time in months, her tone wasn't sharp or defensive. It was humbled. We sat in silence for a long moment. Then she said, "I'm sorry, Eleanor." Daniel looked surprised. I was too, but the apology was real, and that made all the difference. Still, an apology doesn't erase consequences, and those were already beginning to unfold. In the days that followed, there was an undeniable shift in the house. Margaret moved more quietly, more deliberately. She no longer commented on how I folded towels or seasoned dinner. She didn't hover behind me in the kitchen, pointing out better ways to chop vegetables. Instead, she asked questions. Small, tentative ones. "Do you need help with dinner? Should I fold these towels? Would you like me to unload the dishwasher?" Simple gestures, but meaningful ones. And then, one evening, something unexpected happened. She knocked on my bedroom door, something she had never done before, and handed me a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. "Thank you for showing me what I could not see. I want to do better. I will contribute in ways that matter and in ways I overlooked before. Margaret." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Still, the consequences extended beyond emotional shifts. After our confrontation, Daniel and I sat down privately and discussed the future. We agreed that Margaret needed more independence, not in the sense of living alone, but in the sense of having structure. Within a week, we arranged for a visiting nurse to check on her twice a week, a part-time housekeeper to handle her personal laundry and room cleaning, automatic refills and deliveries for her medications, a small monthly stipend from her own savings dedicated to her personal expenses. None of this was punishment. It was balance. Margaret resisted at first. She insisted she didn't need a housekeeper. But when she realized that these changes reduced the pressure on me and allowed our relationship to recover, she reluctantly agreed. Meanwhile, I found myself breathing easier. I resumed my morning tea rituals. I took walks again. I reclaimed pieces of myself that had been slowly eroded by constant tension. The house felt lighter. And as for Margaret, she began making small offerings, little gestures of peace. She started baking again, leaving warm bread on the counter. She watered my plants. She wrote down her own grocery list instead of demanding specific items verbally. One afternoon, she quietly slipped her own receipts into the shared folder. Not as a weapon, as participation. The balance was restored. Not through revenge, through truth. Looking back now, months later, I understand that the confrontation wasn't about expenses or invoices. It was about boundaries, about visibility, about reclaiming the dignity that slips away when someone insists on shrinking you to fit their expectations. I'm 62 years old. I've lived long enough to know this. People rarely intend to become burdens, but they often become one when they refuse to acknowledge the weight they place on others. Margaret wasn't evil. She was insecure, afraid of becoming irrelevant, afraid that her son's home was no longer her domain. Her attempt to demand contribution from me was really an attempt to impose control where she felt she had none. But control built on denial cannot last. Eventually, the truth refuses to stay hidden. My receipts didn't just expose the reality of our household. They exposed the imbalance in our relationship. They showed that love cannot be sustained by unseen labor and unspoken resentment. Truth, accountability, and clarity are the foundation of relationships that endure. Today, Margaret and I live in a quieter, more respectful equilibrium. We are not best friends. We may never be. But we coexist with honesty now, and that honesty has given us peace neither of us expected. If there is a lesson in all of this, it is simple. Silence does not keep the peace. Truth does. And if someone ever demands proof of your worth, do not fear giving it to them. Facts speak louder than assumptions. Evidence carries its own authority. And standing up for yourself, calmly, clearly, without cruelty, is one of the most powerful acts of self-respect you can offer. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, or if you've ever faced a similar situation, I'd love to hear your experiences. Your stories matter, and sharing them might help someone else find their own voice. The floor is yours.